cross-gender humor, right? Like she's like she can't walk in heels, or she gets pissed that the guy in the office gets paid 50% more than she does for the same job, right? Like there's a lot of gender criticism going on. But it's also this story about her trying to decide who they really are. Like what am I? How do I want to live? This is my life now. How do I make it one that I can be comfortable in, right? What's me?
Evil way. Let's talk nerdy things. Yeah. Like comic books and superheroes. With some nerdy pings. Yeah. Writers, cartoonists, and so much more. Whoa. Yeah. So stick around and have some fun with the lovely and adorable Evil Web. Evil Web.
Welcome to Titular Characters. I am your adorable host, Eva Webb, and I'm here again with special guest, Dr. Comics himself, Jason Tondro. How are you, Jason?
It's a good day. What a pleasure to be back. Thank you very much.
It's great to have you. So today, I wanted to talk to you about this thing that I've been doing, and that is that I'm sort of getting ready to prep for this YouTube review show, and it's going to be like somewhere in between like Death Battle and like Casually Comics and comics tropes and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Only one niche is going to be like the weird, obscure comics that you've probably never heard of but have to read.
Right.
There's so many of them out there. I
Agreed.
could think of like a dozen of them off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But I asked for suggestions just the other night, and I got 500 suggestions from
Wow.
Twitter.
500.
Yeah, and of that, I mean, I had not read maybe a good 300 that they suggested.
Yeah.
And well, for one thing, I was really just blown away by the response I've been getting lately. And it's neat how engaged people are. But you had made some really cool recommendations on that thread, and I thought it would be fun to have you come on and talk about them and see where the conversation goes.
Well, it's interesting because I saw some of your posts on this, and you're right, a lot of the recommendations are really wonderful books. Stuff like Flaming Carrot, for example, which was incredibly influential because, of course, the Mystery Men film, one of the early proto-superhero films, came out of Flaming Carrot. And there was a bunch of other wonderful books of that era. The Badger is another classic of mine because it was made by people in Wisconsin, and I was living in Wisconsin at the time. So,
oh, nice.
But the one that I mentioned, the one that I love from that era, is the Maze Agency. Mike Barr, the writer, and a young Adam Hughes, back before he was quite the superstar that he is now. And it was a mystery comic, a romantic mystery comic in the vein of Moonlighting or The Thin Man or something like that. And it was published by Comico back in the 80s, mid to late 80s. And it was unusual, because it wasn't a superhero book, and it was a murder mystery. And moreover, well, one of the things that was most important about it, at least to its structure, is that it was a fair play murder mystery, by which I mean the clues to solving the murder were in each issue of the comic. So you could solve it on your own, and you would know if you were right or not by the last couple of pages. This was a kind of murder mystery that Mike Barr, the author, loves. He was inspired by Ellery Queen, the Ellery Queen magazine short stories. And that was one of his role models for this book. And Barr did writing for Ellery Queen. And in fact, eventually he got a crossover. So in one of the Maze Agency stories, the character of Ellery Queen shows up in the comic, and they do this sort of detective competition, Yeah. It was a wonderful book. It ran for a few years, and then Comico had a lot of financial problems, and it eventually closed up. And then every once in a while, Barr, who still owned the rights to it because it was his intellectual property, he would get it. He would shop it around, and he would find someone else to publish it, and he would get another issue or a maybe 2 or 3 issues out of some publisher, fly-by-night publisher. And then they would close up shop, and he would keep carrying it on. But it was a wonderful book, a character-driven book. And it was a book that I used to get people that didn't read comics into comics. I was dating the girl I was dating at the time was an actor, singer, dancer, and she had never read a comic book in her life, But she would read Maze Agency because it was interesting, and it wasn't what you would expect from a comic book. So yeah, that's my nominee, and I really love that book. It's kind of
Awesome.
Fun. Yeah.
The one I was pretty excited about that came out of that Twitter thread was this one called Trece. It's this black and white Filipino horror comic, and it looks really interesting. It's about cryptids, and it's sort of like the X-Files, but with like a lot of local lore. And one of the monsters is also sort of the villain of the book, and it's like this tree giant. And it looks like a lot of fun. I've actually I went to Comixology. I bought the book digitally. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
Now, okay, so like you mentioned Flaming Carrot earlier.
Yeah.
And Flaming Carrot is one of those books that was like when I was at comic book stores in the 90s.
Yeah.
So like Flaming Carrot was like the hot book to read that wasn't Marvel or DC. You had Flaming Carrot, and you had Concrete, and you had The Tick.
Now,
and
Concrete was brilliant. I love that.
I love Concrete.
And Chadwick went on. Do you remember the Matrix MMO?
I don't.
So after the films were over, there had been long talk about a Matrix MMO. It was an obvious crossover property. I forget who made it. I think it might have been Sony. Anyway, they piled a bunch of money into it, and they published the game, and they hired Paul Chadwick as lead writer. And the game came out, and it was filled with bugs, and it bombed. It struggled on for a year or two, but it never really got any traction. And I always found it very interesting that Chadwick got picked up to be the lead writer on that, and I wish that we had seen more of him, more of his work. But I love Concrete. I thought it was a brilliant concept and wonderfully executed.
Yeah, it was cool. The problem with all 3 of these books, and I know like it's been 30 years, right?
Yeah.
But like in my head, the problem I'm having trouble reconciling is these weren't obscure books at the time. I mean, they are now, right? But when they came out, I mean, they all had a lot of fanfare to them.
They did.
I think Screaming Carrot, just based on the polls, the poll I did last night on it, it looks like Screaming Carrot tentatively is going to be the first thing I review on my thing.
Sure.
I'm super excited about that.
Well, there was this, so at the time, fueled partly by this new idea of the graphic novel, there was a kind of move in comics towards a kind of artistic sensibility in comics. This idea that we were going to make comics that were smarter. And Dark Horse had this brand called Legends. And Byrne and Frank Miller were part of it. And so was Paul Chadwick. Paul Chadwick's Concrete was part of this Legends imprint. Byrne was doing Next Men. And I think Miller's Sin City was one of the tent poles for this. And it was part of an overall movement to this idea that we were going to get together 6 or 8 of the biggest names in comics. We were going to create comics that were more than just disposable throwaway literature. This is some of the stuff we talked about last time when I was on your show. And we're going to make art. And we're going to call it art. We're going to claim that territory that we're going to make art. Now, Flaming Carrot was on a different angle. That was still very much kind of almost an underground kind of feel to it. Like the art was intentionally kind of underground comicsy. It didn't try to have that polish. It was trying to be a kind of amateur. Well, I don't mean amateur, but a very personal, creative vision. And that underground comic style that we would see later in stuff like Mouse.
Well, wasn't it originally published in black and white?
It is.
With
It's black and
color?
white. Yeah, almost
Yeah.
most of it was black and white. Yeah, but then a lot of these books did that. That wasn't unusual because they were publishing these books on their own, and printing cost. The comics industry was going through a kind of a shakeup at the time, and a lot of these little comics companies they just quite frankly couldn't really afford to do much, So a lot of our favorite books from that time, like Boris the Bear, which is another one that book from that era. Do you remember Boris the Bear at all?
Vaguely. I did see it in comic book stores. I don't think I ever read it.
Well, Boris the Bear was a lampoon of all of the funny animal comics at the time, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and all that stuff. And Boris the Bear was a stuffed toy, and he went through his comic killing all of the other funny animal characters, right? So one of the very first person he kills is actually Usagi Yojimbo, and he steals Usagi's katana and uses it to kill everybody else for the rest of the issue.
Oh boy.
Yeah, it was and then he went on to do so the second issue he turned into a giant robot and he killed all the Transformers, and then in a third issue he put on a skull outfit and killed all the Marvel superheroes, and it was just that was its thing, right? That was its gimmick. But they were all in black and white because that was a way for the individual creator to create their vision on a budget they could afford, right? Now it's different because now digital printing and everything, and you can make the whole thing on your tablet, and you can do it print on demand. And so the whole idea of doing a comic in black and white to save money doesn't even really make any sense in 2020 anymore, But at the time, it made perfect sense. It was the only way for these books to come out.
Oh, totally. And now you do it for creative vision.
Exactly.
And it's one of the best superhero books to this day that I have ever read was, do you remember Continuum?
Yeah.
Comics in the Dark by Joseph Naftali?
I don't think I know that one. Nope, you got me.
Oh, it was so good. So basically you've got this ninja with superpowers that goes around fighting lizard people in the middle of the night. The story was interesting, but it was kind of thin, at least at the beginning. They fleshed it all out later.
Sure.
But the thing that really stood out about The Dark in particular was the fight choreography was some of the best I have ever read in a comic book. It was just, it was beautiful.
It's very interesting when you can hire an artist who knows martial arts personally. It shows up in the book. Dennis Cohen did this on Question. If you ever read the Denny O'Neil, Dennis Cohen Question series, a wonderful run, a beautiful, very intelligent book, and also very idiosyncratic. It was, in theory, we're talking about a character who's part of the DC universe, but totally separated from it, right? So it could be a DC book, and at one point, Green Arrow shows up, right? And they do a Batman crossover. But because it's the Question, the Batman crossover is written in a way that you find out that you're never really sure if it's actually Batman or if the main character is just having a hallucination, right? And he's imagining what he thinks Batman would say.
So they sort of went Moon Knight on that one.
Yeah. And I loved Moon Knight too. That's another great example of an old book. But Cohen, he got all this martial arts stuff, right? He knew it physically in his muscles. And so when he draws Vic Sage, the Question, in a fight with three guys with knives or whatever, it all has a kind of gravity and weight to it that you don't see when it's, Kirby drawing a fight scene. And I'm not disparaging Kirby. I'm just saying they're totally different.
Kirby had this flair to him, though. I mean, he wasn't. I don't think Kirby did bad fight scenes, but Kirby did a lot of things just flying out of the page at you. When Kirby hits the scene with comics, it's the first time that characters really just fly out of the page almost three-dimensionally. I know it's two-dimensional, but you sort of get that sensation that they're just flying right out at you, just jumping out.
Well, so for anyone out there who wants to learn about Kirby and Kirby's art and his influence as a creator, the definitive book is Hand of Fire. by a dear old friend of mine who teaches at University of Southern California, and I don't remember which campus. But yeah, the energy, the action of Kirby's art is what's most important. He's not here to draw realism. That's not high on his list of priorities, right? He's here to convey this incredible energy, and it works. And you're absolutely right. Like, people are flying off the pages at you. Even the zip lines, right? The lines that you draw when you're showing somebody moving. Even the
Right.
zip lines are like almost, they look physical, like you could reach out and touch them, or they would fly out of the page at you if you gave them a chance. Yeah, it's just, but I only brought up that sort of in contrast to Cohen or other people who know martial arts, and they draw the comic page and the panel and the figures with a kind of realistic balance that makes them seem real and heavy and physical, plausible, in a way that other traditional superhero work just doesn't.
That makes a lot of sense. So who do you think is the most underappreciated artist in comics
Oh,
right now?
So I have to confess, when you said that we were going to talk about our favorite nostalgia books, I was on very confident ground because I've read a lot of that stuff. But there's so many amazingly talented artists right now, especially international artists, aren't from the US, that are doing such amazing work. And I can't keep up with them all, Ava. I just can't. It's amazing. And I haven't been able to read as many current contemporary comics as I would like. But at the same time, it's kind of a shame that a lot of the long-standing classic talents of the industry have a hard time finding work now. They're if you're somebody who drew comics for 10 years or 20 years, it can be hard to find work. There's kind of a hot new thing syndrome in comics right now. And that's good in the sense that we're bringing in new talent. That's wonderful. And especially talent that hasn't been part of the industry for so long, That's fantastic. I just read that the new writer on Batman, we finally have a female writer on Batman, which is fantastic. But a lot of these classic artists that we've grown up with, or that I grew up with, they can't get work. And it's baffling and a little sad, but I think it says more about the industry than about their skills,
Do you think it has to do with like the economics of the industry? One thing I'm seeing a lot of right now is you've got like these European and South American artists.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of the reason why they're getting the work they are
Yep.
is because their rates are so much lower. And as a result, the side effect to that is that, there's, speaking of Kamiko and,
Yeah.
that new one, whatever it was called, terrific.
Yeah.
You're seeing artists that are legitimately talented,
Yeah.
and they're just getting exploited by these people.
I see it all the time. I work at Paizo, and we make the Pathfinder and the Starfinder role-playing game. And role-playing game companies publishing is on a very tight budget. We don't have a lot of money for this stuff. Our overhead's pretty low. But we hire artists, and a lot of them are foreign. They're Russian, or they're South American or something. And I don't hire the artists. I'm not the art director. I'm not part of that team. I just write what I need on the cover, and I let the art director takes over. But we can afford to pay their rates. They're incredibly talented. They do fantastic work for us, and they're affordable. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, you've hit it right on the head. They're willing to work for rates and that other American artists won't work for. And it is exploitive. Yes, it is. It gets people the comics that they want, but the price isn't fair. It's the comics equivalent of hiring, sweatshop labor, right? Yeah, it's not good.
Yeah, it happened in IT, the field I work in too.
There you go.
The outsourcing thing. I don't know if it made any big changes in IT though, the way it has in comics though. And maybe the same sort of phenomena is happening with all the self-publishing that's
Right.
going on.
Right.
See, with outsourcing in IT, everybody's against it, and I totally understand why. You
Yeah.
know, on the other hand, um, the side effect to it is that a lot of these smaller outfits that never could have gotten software developed before,
Yeah. Yeah.
they can now, and they can go out and compete in the larger marketplace with Microsoft and people like
Yeah.
that. And I have to imagine that maybe that's happening in comics as well.
Yeah.
You're seeing a renaissance right now in self-published books and in digital art and motion comics. I was looking in on a friend of mine who is doing the most incredible motion comics. She's really stretching the medium. I just thought it was the coolest thing. And it struck me that, in the old days, nobody would have opened up the communication channel for something that interesting, for something that weird. But today, the barriers are totally down and anybody can do any of it. The question is it going to be profitable?
Yeah, you have to try to get ethical people in the industry to pay the artist the rate they deserve. And that's easier said than done. Yeah, it's a real challenge. And like you say, because the gatekeepers are down and because people can create their own books and publish their own books, there is an opportunity there. I don't, it's impossible to say how it's going to shake out, but certainly, pay artists what they deserve, what they need to eat. Like I hire artists for my own personal RPG products that I'm publishing, and you have to pay them what they deserve. The artist names their price, and then you decide if you can afford to pay it or not. And if you can't, then you hire somebody else. Don't haggle with the artist. Let the artist tell you what their rate is, and you pay it or you don't.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah, I think you're right. There is so much great art right now and so much top talent. I actually kind of like the way that the American comics industry is just sort of internationalized. I feel like it's sped everybody ahead like 50 years from where we were before in a very, very short period of time, relatively. The American books now, they sort of look like the French or the South American books from the 1980s and 90s, which were, in terms of art, they were much more sophisticated than the American books. Like you were talking about in our last interview,
Yeah,
how, the resolution and the legs and the arms, you make the belt with the line and you make the gloves with the line.
that's right.
You go from that to like drawing on chapel walls,
Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna take us back a little bit, and one of the reasons why I loved that first comic that we talked about, Maze Agency, is because it's by Mike Barr. So I want to link that in with a couple of other books Barr did, and I want to try to put it in a little bit of context. Most people might not know Mike Barr. He doesn't really write comics much anymore, once in a while, but he did write some very influential comics and comics a lot of people read. If they read anything, they probably read Batman and the Outsiders, which Barr wrote most of. And he wrote Son of the Demon, which is a very influential Batman comic that got us the whole Talia relationship thing, and of which Damian Wayne and all these other characters eventually came out of. But one of his most successful and influential books was written in the 80s, and it's Camelot 3000. Now, Camelot 3000 was a limited series, a 12-issue limited series, and it was the first of its kind. DC had done 4-part limited series before, but they'd never done anything that big. In fact, they didn't know what to call it. And on the cover of Camelot 3000, they call it a maxi series, which thank God they stopped calling it that, right? But anyway, it was 12 issues, and it was illustrated by Brian Boland. If you want to talk about an amazing international artist, Boland is one of them, right? He's English artist. And now, if he does anything these days, he only does covers. He did a whole long series of Wonder Woman covers for many, many years. But he does all the interiors and the covers of Camelot 3000. And it's in the 80s, and Boland brings this British art style to it, which was groundbreaking at the time, and it's very punk. And the most famous character in that book, it's a classic story of like King Arthur wakes up at the time of the Earth's greatest need, and it's because Earth is being invaded by aliens, and it's the year 3000 AD. Okay, so it's a completely ludicrous premise, absolutely bananas. But the character in that book that steals the show is the resurrection of Sir Tristan, because Tristan is resurrected in the body of a woman, and it's a trans story.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and so Tristan spends most of the book like resisting the fact that Tristan is now a woman, and he's like, no, I'm a man. And he insistently is like out in front of every fight, and he's carrying the biggest gun, and he's punching people in the face and yelling and shouting all the time, and he cuts his hair off because, you know, men have short hair, and he refuses to dress like a woman, so he's always in pants, you know, and he's insisting he's a man. And then about halfway through the book, Isolde shows up. Now, I'm going to go into medieval literature for a second. Most people don't know who Tristan is because he's part of a romantic triangle, and when people make movies of the King Arthur stories, they always focus on Arthur, Lancelot, Guinevere, and there's not really room for a second romantic triangle, so they cut Tristan. But in the 1300s, Tristan was a bestseller. We have more copies of the book of Sir Tristan than we do of almost any non-religious book in the Middle Ages. I mean, there's like the Bible, and then there's Sir Tristan. And we presume a book's popularity based on how many copies of it survive. That's obviously an imperfect metric, but it's all we have, really. Well, anyway, Tristan's story is similar to the story of Arthur and Guinevere, but it's different. Tristan is the nephew of the king, and the king of Cornwall, whose name is King Mark. And Mark is betrothed to this young Irish princess, whose name is Isolde. And Mark sends Tristan to go pick up Isolde in Ireland and bring her back to Cornwall to get married. Well, while they're on the boat together, Tristan and Isolde, they accidentally drink this love potion, and predictable shenanigans ensue. So then the love potion wears off, and Tristan and Isolde are like, oh shit, now what do we do, right? And they end up running, and Mark chases them, and eventually he catches them and he kills them both, and it's a tragedy. It's different than the Arthur Lancelot thing because Mark is not in any way a redeemable good character. Everybody hates him. Tristan is the obvious hero, and we want Tristan and Isolde to be together. So anyway, so in Camelot 3000, Isolde shows up, and she's like, it's me, Tristan, it's Isolde. And she's ecstatic because she's found Tristan in the year 3000, and Tristan's like, I can't love you. I'm a woman. Right? And it's this great story. And there's supposed this whole alien invasion plot line going on, but Tristan steals the entire show. Eventually, at the end of this story, Tristan has to decide what she's going to do, what he's going to do. He doesn't know what, and a lot of it is phrased like, well, are you going to be a man or are you going to be a woman? It's a very interesting, it's the 80s, okay? So like, you know, we have to judge it for its time. We would talk about a lot of these things in a much more sophisticated way today. But there's this guy in the story who loves Tristan as a woman. His name is Tom. He's a squire. And Tom keeps trying to persuade Tristan, like, no, like you're a woman now. You have to be a woman. And she's like, no, I'm a man. And so finally at the end, she calls Tom down to her room, and she's wearing a dress and she's all made up. And he's thinking, oh, this is it. Like, she's finally come around, and he's got this ridiculous shit-eating grin on his face because he thinks he's done it. You know, he's landed the hot chick. And she says, I'm going away with I'm going away with Isolde. And he's like, what? Well, anyway. And then as soon as he walks away and she closed the door, she turns back to Isolde. She says, well, I hated to lie to him like that, but I didn't know what else to do. She doesn't know what she's going to be. And Isolde, through the power of nostalgia, she says, hey, remember that time when we were running away from King Mark, and we hid out in Lancelot's castle, and he had this huge flower bed of this huge rose garden out there, and remember what that was like? And she's like, oh yeah, that was a really great time. And then she pulls Tristan into the bedroom, and the whole bedroom is covered in roses. And they stay together. They choose each other. And it's a happy ending. All right. This is a very long story, but I do have a point. So then we get May's Agency. And I've already talked about that book a little bit. Well, after May's Agency was done, Mike Barr's next job was a book called Mantra. And we actually talked about Mantra last time I was on your show. Mantra was an Ultraverse comic, and it was published by Malibu. And when Mike Barr went to write Mantra, he knew that this character of Tristan was a gold mine that he never got a chance to fully explore. So Mantra was a story about a warrior, like a soldier guy, a kind of immortal, eternally reborn soldier guy who's fighting in this war across the centuries. But he gets killed in the first issue, and instead of coming back as a man like he has all the other times, he comes back as this magic-wielding sorceress.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And is in the body of a woman. This is a little bit later, so this is like the early 90s. And now Tristan's the star of the show. Now he writes for like 30 or so issues. Mantra goes for 3 years, and it's all about this character who thinks of himself as a man, but he's been reincarnated in the body of a woman. And at first, there's just a lot of kind of obvious cross-gender humor, right? Like she's like she can't walk in heels, or she gets pissed that the guy in the office gets paid 50% more than she does for the same job, right? Like there's a lot of gender criticism going on. But it's also this story about her trying to decide who they really are. Like what am I? How do I want to live? This is my life now. How do I make it one that I can be comfortable in, right? What's me? And it was a wonderful book. And it's part of that, Malibu's was trying to create a new superhero setting with a lot of new characters in it. And it was buoyed up by some great writers and good artists, and then also a kind of innovative printing process that made the books color physically stand out on the shelves. And that eventually got them bought by Marvel, as we talked about last time. But at one point, the main character, Mantra, and her name is Mantra, right? Like it's built in. Well, anyway, Mantra gets reborn back into his regular body. He's in a physical man's body again. And the woman whose body he had been in all this time is back in the body of the sorceress. And so the two of them have like 2 issues where she's a woman and he's a man, and they're like trying to figure out and of course they sort of fall for each other. And it was near the end of the run. And she, in this quiet, tender moment, uses a line. She says, "Oh, you lamb." She calls him a lamb. Well, that was a line from May's Agency. The protagonist of the May's Agency was Jennifer Mays. She was a former CIA agent who is now a private detective. And her on-again, off-again boyfriend, who she eventually marries in the book, Gabriel Webb, who writes detective novels, like cheap, the kind of novels you'll buy in an airport, like the cheap detective novels.
I love his last name.
Yeah, Gabriel Webb. Yeah, exactly. And she had this kind of tagline, her catchphrase, whenever they were having a quiet, tender moment, and she would say, "You lamb." And it was kind of like her saying, "Oh, you're just adorable. Like I just like that. I love the shit out of you," right? It was like her kind of tagline for him. Well, May's Agency had been canceled for years by the time that this character in Mantra uses that line. And Eva, you have never seen a fan so mad as I was when I read that line. Because you can't steal your own catchphrase from another character. Like that would be like Jack Kirby creating another strong guy over at DC who says it's clobbering time. Like you can't do that. There's only one clobbering time dude, right? And it's the Thing. And
Okay.
I know. And I wrote into the comic and I wrote this long letter saying, like, look, you can't do that. Like, we have been waiting for another Jennifer Mays comic for years. And now you're going to like take all of her best bits and give her to this other character that just shown up for like 2 issues ago. You can't, you're betraying us. Well, apparently I hit a nerve because the people at Malibu wrote me back and they said, like, okay, you're absolutely right. We love those characters. We know Jennifer Mays. Jennifer Mays is a friend of ours. This character is no Jennifer Mays, which is a famous Kennedy quote. But anyway, and they sent me like this package with a bunch of like, oh, and here's an ash can for an upcoming issue of Mantra, and here's a bunch of free promo art and stuff like that. They sent me this whole care package, basically saying, we're so sorry. You're right.
Oh my God. Well,
I know.
that's sweet though. That's a really nice thing to do.
It was. And it, you know, I mean, I've gotten letters printed in comics once in a while, but I never had a comics company mail me a bunch of stuff, you know, and say, look, they were basically recognizing, like, you're a huge fan of Barr's work. You follow him from company to company. We get that. And
Well,
yeah.
well, to be fair, Jason, you know, you are probably the most knowledgeable nerd I've ever run into, and I know some extremely knowledgeable people.
Well,
You know, you were,
that's very
you were like
kind.
the only person who caught my reference on like the second cover. You're like, oh, I know that costume. Nobody else caught that. And I thought it was a pretty deep dive that nobody else was ever going to catch. And now you caught it. You're like,
Well,
oh, hey, you know, that's Greatest American Hero. And yeah, you were right. That's exactly what I did.
you have to remember, like, I watched Greatest American Hero with my mom every week, right? Like, it was a ritual. It's an interesting show. Like, Greatest American Hero is such an interesting show because it was a pre-super, like, it was an early attempt to do superhero, right? Like, they didn't really know how to do them back then. But it tried to do it, and it had this sort of recurring B plot with him being a teacher and having the guy from Eddie and the Cruisers in his classroom. You know, it was like this weird Welcome Back Kotter Superman riff. You know,
I
kind of.
love that show.
Yeah,
Like I was like 4 when that show was like running, and I would
yeah.
watch it religiously every week. And I loved the conceit of it was that um, aliens gave him this incredibly powerful super suit, right, that he
That's
gets
right.
to wear, but he totally lost the manual, and now he's just sort of aimlessly using it to fly in to fight evils. But you know he'll fly into a wall occasionally,
There,
and
there was there
it
was
was just charming.
there was one reason why I watched that show every week, and that one reason was Connie Selica. Okay, his girlfriend, right? Who
She was great.
she was gorgeous, and I was of the right age, right? Like, it did not take much. I was the right age, and she was beautiful, and I would watch her just drink coffee for an hour if I had the chance, right? Like, that's all I cared about. But the show had Robert Culp as his FBI handler, doing actually some pretty funny work for him, and it had one real bad writing problem, which is that it had one move, which is he discovers the suit has a new power. And almost every episode was about some crazy new power that he discovered. And it was telekinesis, or it was light things on fire, or it was go invisible, or whatever.
I
And as
remember the disability episode.
yeah, and as you can imagine, after a couple seasons of this, the suit was so powerful, it became really hard to write for. This is the same problem that you ended up seeing 20 years later, 30 years later with Heroes, right? Which is another wonderful television series that had too many superpowers in it. If your protagonist can do anything, and your only excuse is that he doesn't know how to use the power, he doesn't know how to use the suit, that gets really thin really fast. We would do that story differently today, and they've tried. They've tried to reboot Greatest American Hero more than once, often starring his daughter. They give him a daughter, and she puts on the suit and still can't use it. But it's never gotten more than a pilot, unfortunately.
Well, that's a shame. That's a
Yeah,
shame.
it is.
That would be one that I would like to see just sort of a straight reboot of. You
Yeah.
know, just tell the story straight, Deadpan humor, take everything you can from the original, but at the same
Yep.
time completely forget the original existed. And
Yeah.
just find somebody really talented and really silly to play the part. And I think that would do it. I think that was one of the shows that when I was a kid really just sort of inspired my love of superheroes above and beyond the Spider-Man stuff that I already loved. I loved the idea that you could have a superhero who is still a hero, even though he doesn't do everything right.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Sure. There's a lot of great things about that show. The whole educational subplot, the subplot that you make him a teacher. And that means he's taking the students on all these field trips, and it's always an adventure. The disaster happens while they're on the field trip or whatever. But also, the show was about some kind of moral lesson, some kind of ethical choice, and this would be illustrated and expanded upon in conversation between the teacher and the students at some point in the episode. This sounds trite to us today, and in many ways it would be, but it helps us understand that superheroes are made for kids. I mean, there's a reason why you loved this story so much when you were 4. They're made for kids, and they're designed to sort of teach us these moral lessons. And Greatest American Hero embraced that. It wasn't ashamed to be a teaching show, and I love that about it.
It was great. And I also loved when there was a point where the aliens came back down and they're like,
Yeah.
wow, you're not very good at this.
And then they give him. Now, I want to note that parts of this show were actually very scary for kids. When the aliens came down, they took over your radio station, and they would talk to you through the radio by spinning the dial to catch different words, right? Which now it sounds trite, but at the time it was kind of a weird, freaky effect. Now it's just something that they stole for Transformers, for Bumblebee. But back in the day, it was kind of weird. And then also they animated corpses. Like there was a dead body that got up and walked around, and it talked for the aliens. The aliens were animating it. Well, that was like a zombie on the show, and it was a corpse guy. They did the makeup on it, and it was pretty freaky. So it was funny, but it was also a little thrilling at the same time. But yeah, and like the end of the first season or the beginning of the second season, the aliens come back, and they actually give him a new manual. They give him a replacement manual, and then he promptly loses it again because he discovers that he can shrink. So he shrinks, and then he grows back to large size, and the book is, the size of a pin, and no one can find it.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. That was great. Oh, so much fun.
So much fun.
Another good show that was out at the time. So there was a trifecta of television shows in the early 80s that I loved. Greatest American Hero, it was Knight Rider, it was Automan. Remember Automan?
I very much remember Automan. There was a number of kind of superhero stories that came out at that same time. There was Automan, there was Manimal, a guy who transformed into a giant panther. Automan, of course, was riffing on the Tron films, which were big at the time. Yeah,
it was so much more interesting than Tron.
Yeah, they never lasted very long. Yeah, they lasted like half a season and they got canceled. But there were a lot of attempts to do superhero stuff on television. I think the most successful superhero television show was probably The Incredible Hulk with Bill Bixby, which might be before your time.
I remember it. I grew up with Incredible Hulk in reruns.
Yes.
And funny thing about that was, so like the television station that I would watch in San Francisco, they would have The Incredible Hulk, and then right after that, they would have Highway to Heaven in the same rerun block.
I remember Highway to Heaven, yes.
And it was kind of the same show.
It was exactly the same show. Yes, you're right. Which is to say, it's The Fugitive. I mean, both Highway to Heaven and The Incredible Hulk were basically updates of The Fugitive television show, which is before my time. But yeah, you've got this guy who's on the run from the law, and he goes from town to town helping people, and then he's got a secret, and he has to reveal his secret or use his abilities, and then he has to move on. And it's classic Western. There's Jess Nevins, who writes encyclopedias and done a lot of work on the superhero over the years. He he writes about the Western and the superhero as being essentially a story about the gun versus civilization. That is, the town is menaced by some kind of threat, right? Whatever it is, evil ranchers or outlaws or whatever. And they need the gun, by which they need the gunslinger to come in and save them. But the gunslinger represents chaos and unpredictable forces of violence. And so they want the gun, they need the gun, but they also hate and fear the gun. And so as soon as the gunslinger arrives in town and he cleans up the town, now they all just want him to leave. And so he does. And you can see this theme appearing in superhero stories when you get something like the old Incredible Hulk show, where he would drift from town to town hitchhiking to that famous piano theme, you know, and finally, and he would arrive in town, he would make some friends, he would have a new nickname for himself, a new pseudonym, and then inevitably something disastrous would happen, and Bill Bixby would turn into Lou Ferrigno in fright wig and green makeup, and he would save some little kid or save somebody from a falling tree or whatever, and then the police would start investigating, and there would be a second Hulk out scene later on in the episode, right near the end. And then as soon as that was over, he would have to leave town and he'd be back on the highway thumbing his way. It was a perfect formula show, but it was totally carried by the performance of Bixby. Bixby had this soulful, romantic, Byronic hero about him. Like the Byronic hero was that character he's darkly handsome and he's got a mysterious past where he did terrible things in his past, but he never talks about them. And sometimes he may not even remember them. Like there's something going on with his memory and he doesn't even really know what he did, but he knows that it was bad. Marvel's most famous example of this is Wolverine. Logan is Marvel's Byronic hero. And he's done these terrible things in his past, but he never wants to talk about them. And if he can talk about them, he only remembers some of them. But he's also hypnotic and a kind of natural charisma that women are drawn to. And Bixby was like that. He had that. And he had built his early career on this father-son show called The Courtship of Eddie's Father, where he played a single father with a young son. And I was the age of a young son, you know, and I came from kind of a broken family where I had like a different dad every few years. And Bixby's father in that film, in that series, was a huge, like, wish for me. Like that was like the father I wish I had, you know. And when the father from The Courtship of Eddie's Father became the Hulk, it was like put my two hands together, right? It was like the two things I wanted most in the world: superpowers and a dad. Right.
You know, I saw that show once, the Courtship of Eddie's Father, and I thought I was watching the Hulk. So I sat patiently for the Hulk out, and he never did. And my 4-year-old little self was just so disappointed at the end of it.
Yeah, of course you were. Wonderful, good old stuff. But of course now, of course, television as an industry is completely different. Now, television is the 3-year miniseries business, right? Like you're lucky if you get renewed for a third season. And so the whole way that television is made has changed. We get some amazing television out of it. We got the Netflix Marvel series, for example, which are amazingly good, almost all good.
Speaking of the Netflix series, that Daredevil show was the show that I have wanted ever since Trial of the Incredible Hulk, when they teased us with it and never delivered.
Yes. Trial of the Incredible Hulk, which ends with Wilson Fisk flying away on a hovercraft and Daredevil shaking his fist at him and saying, "Wilson, curse you, Wilson Fisk." Yes. It was ridiculous. The Daredevil show with Charlie, I can't remember the actor, with Deborah Ann Wall as Karen, Charlie Cox as Daredevil. A fantastic show. I was not so wowed about the middle of the second season when Elektra walks on that show. All I want to do is I want Matt to run from Elektra as fast and as far as possible, because in that show Karen was so great. like Karen was obviously the best thing that Matt ever had going, and he was an absolute idiot to ever do anything to ruin that relationship. And so Matt starts acting so stupid in the second half of the second season that I just want to reach through the screen and smack him. But the writers fix it all by the end of the third season. The third season is so good. It gives me everything I wanted. And it ends with that perfect Nelson, Murdoch, and Paige napkin scrawl, you know, where they're gonna put the old business back together. The band's gonna come back together, and Paige is gonna be part of it in a way that she was not before. It's tragic that series ended, but if it had to end, it ended on a fantastic note. Loved it.
I'm holding out hope that now that Marvel has the rights, that they'll just back the entire cast and keep it going.
You know, there are rumors that Cox might show up in Daredevil in the Spider-Man film. I don't know. It's interesting because Kingpin, of course, debuted in Spider-Man, not Daredevil. We associate Kingpin with Daredevil because of Frank Miller's amazing work in the Born Again storyline, which I have studied at an academic level and written papers about. There's so much to talk about with Born Again. It's fantastic. And it really made Fisk kind of into Daredevil's archenemy, his nemesis. But for decades prior to that, the Kingpin was just one of many Spider-Man villains. And so there's been some talk that maybe we might get a crossover, we might bring Cox in to play Daredevil in the film. I don't know. You know, Eva, I don't think the universe is kind enough to give me the reunited Daredevil cast. I don't think the universe is that good. I wish it was.
I hope I end up in the timeline where it is.
I would like that very much. And Deborah Ann Wallace, well, you know, she's a nerd like us. She runs D&D. She streams her D&D games now. And she also makes everybody on every movie she's in play D&D with her. The whole cast of Murder on the Orient Express had to play D&D because Deborah Ann Woll was in there, you know. So I have to cheer for her. Plus, I just think she's amazingly talented. They did this. That Daredevil show was so groundbreaking. It was so amazing. There's this whole sequence in there. I don't remember what episode it's in. Episode 8 or 9 of the first season, where Karen is interviewing this Mexican woman that lives in the building. And they spend 10 minutes on this whole conversation in Spanish that's subtitled. Okay, what television show for an American audience spends 10 minutes on a subtitled conversation in Spanish? No, nobody. They cut that shit. But this show didn't. It breathed. It said, look, we can make these episodes as long as we want. If we want to make this an hour and a half episode of Daredevil, we can. There's no commercials. There's nothing that's telling us how long the episode has to be. It's not like Mandalorian, where every episode is less than an hour so that we can later on pad it with commercials and broadcast it on regular television. None of that shit. If they want to spend 10 minutes with Karen talking in Spanish, they just do. I love that. I love the willingness of the show to break all these supposed rules of American television.
You know what else I loved about Daredevil was the opening sequence. Paying attention and watching the animation when that's going on, you get like 40 years of Easter eggs that you're not supposed to recognize unless you've read like all of the Frank Miller stuff and some of the Wally Wood stuff and some of the Sal Buscema Daredevil.
Yeah.
Or was it John Buscema? I don't remember. It was one of them.
Yeah.
I get them mixed up. But yeah, it was great. I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, well, that goes there and that's from that and that. Yeah. I really, really got my nerd on the first time I saw it. And then I was like, I can't. This is going to be good because I can't. It has to be because there's no way they can know that much about the Daredevil comic and not have a great show.
You know, there's so much about that show that was so groundbreaking. That first hallway fight that Matt gets in, right? You remember what I'm talking about? I think it's episode 3 or 4, when he gets in we don't move the camera. We point the camera down the hallway. There's doors to the left, doors to the right. And we just watch Matt get the shit kicked out of him from one door to the next for about 15 minutes, right? And he's slugging, and it's all one giant take. And I don't know how many people come out of those doors, 6 or 8, I think. And he's barely standing by the end. And the whole thing is with him just in like a muscle shirt and a black bandana, right? Because he doesn't have his costume or anything yet. And when people watch that, man, it blew them away. Like it established the hallway fight as an iconic set piece of these shows. So much so that then when 2 years later they do the Defenders, and we get all 4 of those characters and together, and what do? They get in a goddamn hallway fight, right? And by that point, that's the showmakers realizing that, hey, that's our genre. We are in the hallway fight genre now, and we need to just embrace it.
Well, didn't they do one of those in Iron Fist as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's hallway fights in every show. Certainly, Cage gets into at least one of them. Yeah, in fact, it got to the point where I very briefly tried to do a podcast blog about the Netflix shows, and we titled it Hallway Fights because that was so iconic, you know. Yeah, it's a great show.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh boy. So Jason, we're almost at the end of our show, and I have asked you all of the speculative questions that we usually ask at the end of our show, and I don't have any new ones.
Oh no!
So I thought I would make up a totally new set of speculative questions for you, just because it would be fun. What do you think?
Can I answer like James Lipton's guests always answered? Because I really want to say fuck. Can I say fuck?
Of course you can. This is you can say anything you like.
You know what I mean? You would always say, "What is your favorite word? What is your favorite curse word?" And the audience and the actor would always say "fuck" because everybody knows that's the best possible curse word. Everybody knows that.
It is a great curse word. Okay, so we've established who your superhero is. Your internal Jason Tondro superhero.
Yes.
But what we have not established is if you had sort of the whole of superhero reality at your disposal.
Yes.
Who would be on your superhero team?
Oh, well, I'll tell you, my dearest friend in all the world, Jim Seals, my brother from another mother, would be on my super team. And I don't know what kind of powers he would have, but it wouldn't even matter because he's there to be the Captain America dude. He's there to be the moral. Yeah. He's like the guy.
Well, now we have to have him on the show to find out.
Yeah, you told me. Like, yeah, and Jim's a wonderful scholar of comics on his own. He's written comics and he's a wonderfully talented guy. And he knows all of this stuff much better. You think I know these comic artists and no way. He has got me beat every way you can measure. But anyway, Jim would be on the team because I need the emotional rock, right? The guy that always knows what's the right thing to do. And then I guess, let me think. Well, we need to have like a smart aleck character, and we need to have at least one heroine on the team. And then maybe the smart aleck is also the rebel. We need like the Hawkeye character, right? The one that's like always questioning authority and always says, no, you're doing it wrong. Like we need that person. I don't know who that would be. But Jim and I, we could do the brave and the bold. We could be the 2-person team up until I can find out the rest of the team.
That would work. So, like more of a manageable small superhero team than like an ensemble like the Justice League or the Avengers.
Well, it's interesting because we live here in this COVID now, right? Like we've been quarantined. I haven't been in a room with another human being since March. I don't even know what it would feel like to be in a room with 6 other Avengers, right? Like, what is that? But yeah, I don't even know. I'd probably end up with some team like the Defenders, like the non-team, the guys who, the team that's like a bunch of weirdos that don't have anywhere else to go. That's probably what I'd end up with.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
That would be awesome. Okay, I think that's all I have for you right now, Jason. It has been a pleasure.
Absolutely a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me back. What about you? Like, who's your inner hero?
Okay, so I was thinking about this the other day, and it totally changes with my mood.
Sure it
But
does.
right now, I'm thinking straight up Jessica Drew,
Oh,
Spider-Woman.
yeah. What a great character, Spider-Woman.
Oh,
Good
she's
one.
amazing, and she's come such a long way, you
She
know.
really has. Yeah. What did you think of Bendis's take on her?
I liked it,
Okay.
actually. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I like the sort of the rejuvenation of the character, the
Yep.
updating,
Yep.
the new powers that she
Yeah.
has. They're kind of awesome.
Well,
And when I ju- and always when Jessica Drew has been Spider Woman, my thought has been ever since I was a little kid and I saw the Spider Woman cartoon, I was like,
yeah.
she is the prettiest, sexiest superhero that there has ever been,
Yeah.
and I still think that way. So
No,
if I could pick one, that would be it. Sorry, I keep
Ben,
interrupting you.
no, you're fine. Bendis clearly loves the character, and he brought her back because he loves her, and it's good. It's good that he did all that. She has a fantastic costume. Don't change a stitch. It's a perfect outfit. And I remember the cartoon. What I find most interesting about Spider Woman is that in the original series, her original comic book, which Claremont wrote, her nemesis was Morgana Le Fay. That was her main archenemy, which ties her into the whole Arthurian thing, which I literally wrote an entire book about, right? So
Right.
she becomes, yeah, so she becomes part of that Arthurian comics mythos where we explore how King Arthur gets used in superhero comics, and she becomes part of that because Morgana's appearances. She's a wonderful character, and that's a great choice.
I thought it was pretty cool. I really like. I'm getting caught up on the current run of Spider Woman. I'm a
Mm.
little upset they changed her costume again. I like the yellow and red. The
Oh,
Wests are kind of cool, you know, the black and red, but
yeah.
it's not as cool as the original.
Is she still in the jacket? There for a while she was in a jacket outfit.
Right? No, she's not in that anymore.
Okay.
Excuse.
The
So
the
now
ja-
she's in.
yeah. The jacket outfit was interesting because it was part of that whole era where we were trying to redesign women's costumes to be cosplayable. The best example of this was the Batgirl of Burnside, if you remember that, where Batgirl got a new outfit, and it was intentionally a very, very cosplayable outfit. Like you could buy most of the elements of it from, off of Amazon or a used clothing store. And it was the sort of outfit that ordinary women can wear and not feel incredibly self-conscious. It's not like a classic men's version of what a superheroine should wear. And it looked much more like ordinary clothing. And they did a similar thing then with Spider-Woman for a while. And I appreciate the desire to do that, because if you can get your readers to cosplay as the character, you can engage with them and you can build really loyal followings. And it's an acknowledgement of the increasing role that cosplay plays in the whole superhero fandom. Not since March, of course, because none of us can go to a convention. We didn't have San Diego Comic-Con for the first time in 50 years? But that's an increasingly big part of fandom. And it's nice to have superheroine costumes that a woman doesn't feel embarrassed or humiliated to wear. And because Spider-Woman she's not an instantly recognizable character whose costume can therefore almost never change. Like somebody like, Wonder Woman's costume changes, but it's got certain elements to it that are kind of baked in. Spider-Woman doesn't even have that. If you ask the average person on the street, what does Spider-Woman's costume look like? They probably think it looks like Spider-Man's, right? Because they never heard of her. And that gives the artist and the creative team incredible license to redo her costume however they want. And I respected what they were trying to do with the jacket outfit and everything. But I confess I have a deep love for the original. I think it's pretty perfect.
Me too. I think the comics industry has been sort of grappling with the issue
Yeah.
of, how do you make female characters sexy without objectifying them? You know
Yes.
what? And they've sort of swung in every which direction on that. And I think they're still grappling with it,
I,
honestly.
I totally agree with you. I think that, in fact, I think you can see them grappling with it. Like there's a kind of, and I think grappling is a good term for it because they're trying to engage. Like I really do think that a lot of these creators, their hearts are in the right place. They're trying to make the industry better. They're trying to make comics more approachable to women. They're trying to make it more aware. And I get that. I mean, the best example of this has got to be Ms. Marvel, right? Who starts off back in the 70s with this like two-piece outfit with an exposed stomach. And then she gets the kind of one-piece thigh-high outfit that we think of now as kind of her classic outfit. And in many ways, it's a really great outfit. I love the fact that it references the Shazam family with the exact same arc of the lightning on her chest, and that she's got a sash. There's a lot of obvious references to the source material there. But then when they redo her outfit and for Captain Marvel, I mean, that's just a fantastic suit, and no matter how much I love the old version, you have to bow down to the genius of the new Captain Marvel suit. The fact that it completely covers her, that it looks like a uniform, that the helmet turns her hair into the mohawk. I mean, that's brilliant. I don't know who thought that up, but that person should live in infamy, right? and so there's just so much good stuff there. And then they in many ways, that's a costume that's designed to have a movie made out of it. And it worked. Spider-Woman hasn't gotten there, like she hasn't gotten to the point where we've got a costume that it both is aesthetically pleasing and yet also fits our 21st century Me Too movement sensibilities. We haven't found that perfect combo yet.
Well, so like what they did was they started her off giving her back the original costume at the beginning
Yeah.
of the current run of Spider-Woman.
Okay.
And now they gave her this black and red thing where it looks, it's sort of, the shapes on it are all the same as the original costume.
Okay.
It's sort of like you took Spider-Woman and dipped her in Peter Parker's Spider-Man and just came out something weird. I don't like the current costume. I like the red and yellow because it's sort of iconic, and the way she carried it as a character was just fabulous.
That yellow hourglass pattern on her belly was brilliant because it was the sort of thing that you would expect an actual spider to have, right? Like it would have this yellow marking on its body. And I loved it because it evoked a spider without looking anything like Spider-Man's costume. I mean, let's be honest, Spider-Man's costume is actually kind of a pain in the ass to draw. All of those little webs all over, that web pattern all over his outfit, all over the red parts. Artists hate that shit. They don't want, Spider-Woman's outfit was beautifully elegant, and when they translated into a cartoon, they didn't even have to change it, So yeah, it was pretty great. Oh,
Awesome. Well. You know how comics are, though. Eventually, they'll get back to the status quo.
Well, what'll happen is they'll hire somebody who read those comics when they were 7, and that's their Spider-Woman, and they'll recreate it, or they'll make a movie out of it, and then the characters will start wearing whatever she wears in the movie. This is what happened with, of course, great example of that is the X-Men. The X-Men run with Zorn. Oh shit! Who wrote the X-Men story? I can't believe we both forgotten this. Do you not?
I'm not a big X-Men reader. I'm sorry, Jason.
British guy, not Alan Moore. He wrote Multiversity.
Oh, what's his name? Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
What's his name? Anyway, he writes the X-Men, and they're all wearing these black and yellow leather outfits that look like comic versions of what they were wearing in the Singer movies, right? And you can see that kind of trajectory moving in reverse, where instead of the films making versions of the comic costumes, it's the comics making versions of the film costumes.
That's gonna bug me, though. Are we thinking Grant Morrison? Is
Yeah,
he
Grant
the
Morrison.
guy?
Yeah, Grant Morrison. That's exactly it. Yes, Grant Morrison. And all of your listeners are thinking, I can't believe they forgot Grant Morrison's name. Give me a break. His name's on a book that's literally facing me right now on my bookshelf. But yes, I forgot his
So
name.
bad. My listeners are very, very forgiving, and I love.
Thank God. But yeah, so maybe she'll get made into a movie because she's part of the whole Spider-Man to Sony license, right? Like she was part of that whole trade deal. And in theory, they could make a Spider-Woman movie. And if they do, they'll hire amazing wardrobe artists who will come up with a brand new original Spider-Woman outfit. And if the movie is successful, that costume will translate into the comics. And if it bombs, no one will ever see it again, right?
That's fair. Or they could do a cartoon like they did with the Marvel Spider-Verse thing.
That would be great. That would be great. Yeah, Spider-Gwen's outfit is a perfect example of a spider outfit for a woman that the fans really they really loved. It just took off. And it's interesting because, I mean, it's a cool outfit, but I would never have expected it to become as popular as it has become. Maybe it's the hood. I don't know what it is, but there's something about that costume that female fans in particular have just really latched onto over the last 5-7 years. And she's become kind of iconic in that outfit, which is great.
Well, it's one of those costumes where it's pretty and it's functional, but it's not like exploitative, and it's not too much. It's just the right amount of everything, and whoever came up with it was a genius.
It is a beautiful outfit. I will not. You're absolutely right.
Do you have anything to promote right now?
So yeah, for about a year, I have been working on a new adventure path for the Starfinder role-playing game. So these are monthly adventures, and the first one and second one are out. It's called Fly Free or Die. It is a science fantasy adventure in the sort of Traveler, Firefly, Han Solo mode, where the heroes are space truckers just trying to do the job and get paid, and they are being chased by the evil company that they used to work for and Drow crime boss, who's hired bounty hunters and assassins after them. The first volume is called We're No Heroes, and the second one is Merchants of the Void. And if you are interested in science fiction or science fantasy role-playing games, check it out, because I put like a year of my life into this thing, and I would love to hear what people think about it. In addition, I wrote the first volume of the Extinction Curse adventures for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, The Show Must Go On, in which the heroes are members of a circus. So the player characters are a circus troupe, and the ringmaster is murdered on the first day, and they have to put the circus on and find out who the killer is, and shenanigans ensue, and there's an evil druid and cannibalistic lizard people and dinosaurs and all kinds of crazy stuff. And then also I do a weekly show on Star Trek. It's called Space Force. You can hear it on the Banff podcast channel. I'm on there with my fantastic co-hosts, Jim Seals and Aid Smith, both of whom are far more knowledgeable about Star Trek than I am. And I am there to ask questions as we look at the latest Star Trek stuff, which right now is the 3rd season of Discovery. We are in the final 3 episodes of that series. And that's kind of what I've got going on right now. Thank you for asking.
Awesome. Well, Jason, I just want to thank you again for coming on the show for a second time. And I wanted to extend the offer that you can come back seriously anytime you want to. You are my favorite that I've ever had on, quite seriously.
Well, you are so kind. Thank you so much. And congratulations on the incredible success of your show. I mean, you only started this thing a couple of months back, right?
Yeah, and it's starting to take off. I'm really excited about it.
You've really accomplished something, and I'm just so in awe. Congratulations on all your success.
You were too nice. And now it's time for the credits. Isn't Jason Tondro just amazing? We have a ton of links, places where you can follow him and do the stuff you do. Titular Characters is a podcast about the things we love. It's hosted and produced by the adorable Eva Webb. That's me. Podcast art is done by Luxiva, who is so talented. I love her. Our theme song was written and composed by Antonia Marquis. Sound design for this episode was done by Brogan Malloy. This show would not be possible without the love and encouragement of our listeners. That's you. Join us next time for another exciting adventure in cyberspace. Oh, and when you do, bring candy.